Okay, it looks like we are at 6:32. So maybe we will get started here. I'd like to welcome everybody for coming on tonight. That we really appreciate the time that producers are taking out of their hectic lives and this crazy interesting time. So we really appreciate everybody bringing forward or coming forward this Thursday evening and American Thanksgiving, actually. So I'm Kelly Smith Fraser. I'm the chair of Alberta Beef Producers, and I ranch southeast of Red Deer near Pine Lake, Alberta. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us this evening. While this doesn't actually look like the same typical producer meetings that we're used to, we want you to take away the same level of information and engagement you would have received at an in-person meeting. I would like to introduce our members of our ABP executive. We have Dr. Melanie Woke, our vice chair. Melanie has a cow-calf operation in the northeast zone near Beauvalin. We're also joined by Brad Sawchuk, our finance chair, and he ranches in the southeast zone near Jenner. And finally, we're joined by our past chair, Charlie Christie, who ranches and has a feedlot at Trochu. They will also be available to answer questions throughout the evening. Awesome. So we are here to provide you with an overview look of what ABP and our partner organizations have been working on this year, and to hear your feedback and answer any questions. If you do have any questions, we do ask that you submit them through the question and answer function in the chat. You'll see down at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A. If you could please use that instead of using the chat function. So on tonight's agenda, I will provide an ABP update. There will be a short financial presentation, and you'll hear about ABP's new marketing and communications initiatives from General Manager Brad Dubois. Canfax will also give a short market update, and you'll hear from our national partners at Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Beef Cattle Research Council, Canada Beef, and Public and Stakeholder Engagement. If there are questions throughout, we will do our best to have them answered live as we go, and there will be a question and answer period with all of this evening's speakers after the presentations have concluded. Our speakers will also be able to answer questions through the Q&A function. You heard about and voted on the proposed structural changes to ABP at the 2019 producer meetings. These changes were voted on and approved by our delegate body, and in September, the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry also approved the changes to the ABP plan regulation. The geographical zones have been reduced from 9 to 5 zones, and the number of delegates from 54 to 35. The Board of Directors will be up for election at the annual general meeting in March, with 12 at-large positions and at least one director elected from each zone. As of this evening, the cow-calf and cattle feeder councils will cease operations. If you joined us for the Producer Town Hall in June, you heard about our work through the first wave of COVID-19, which included significant government relations efforts and increased communications to producers. Our website hosted COVID-19 resources for producers, including updates, guidelines, and recommendations. There is also details on financial support programs and form letters to contact government officials. In June, we were watching processing capacity return to pre-disruption levels as we worked with industry partners and government on the details for the Fed Cattle Set-Aside program. We submitted a proposal to the provincial government for further compensation that would support cow-calf and backgrounding producers by providing funding to reduce the cost of Western livestock price insurance premiums and to support the elimination of the reference margin limit on egg stability. The deadline for WLPIP came and went without a commitment from the government, but luckily markets have yet to see a significant disruption as we head towards the end of the year. We heard positive news from the federal government Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food just last week when they released a report on business risk management programs, which included a recommendation to remove the agri-stability reference margin limit. The most recent set-aside numbers have indicated that over 70,000 animals have been put on the program, with approximately half to be released by January 2021. A few other successes I would like to note are the thank you campaign that we collaborated with Alberta Cattle Feeders Association to create a video of Alberta producers offering thanks to processing plant workers during the initial COVID-19 crisis. It was shared on both organizations' social media channels and received over 45,000 views. We heard back from the plants and the workers appreciated the recognition of their importance to our industry. We worked closely with ACFA also to secure continued access to temporary foreign workers through the essential service designation agriculture received from the government. Recognizing that parents would need access to learning materials once schools closed in March, we launched our new educational resources with a mini campaign utilizing our influencer network. This campaign ran through the spring and was picked up again in the fall. Lastly, a review of our media coverage from April to August showed our earned media reach, where ABP was either interviewed or our communications were referenced in an article, totaling 3.2 million unique views, meaning that many people actively engaged with media coverage connected to ABP. We continue to work with industry partners as we monitor COVID-19 numbers across the province and watch for any indication of potential impacts to our industry. I would like to thank the ABP directors and our staff for their willingness to adapt throughout this COVID-19 crisis. They have continued to show up virtually and in person and represent producers across the province during these very difficult and uncertain times. So if there's any questions on the information I just covered, we could answer them now. And once again, I will ask that you please submit any questions through the Q&A function and not the chat. We won't be monitoring the chat. And if not, we will move into the financial presentation.
This is Alberta Beef Producers' financial position as of March 31st, 2020. The financial statements in the annual report have been audited and found in order by Kingston Ross Pasnick LLP. The statement of operations reflects net revenue from the Alberta Service Charge and non-refundable national levy of approximately $16.9 million, which is comparable to the prior year. ABP collected $9.4 million in national levy payments, which were forwarded to the Canadian Beef Checkoff Agency, who retain a small percentage for operations. The balance was allocated to Canada Beef, Beef Cattle Research Council, and to public and stakeholder engagements, based upon an allocation determined annually by the ABP Board of Directors. Operating expenses for ABP were approximately $4.9 million. These expenses are listed in the Schedule 1 of financial statements in the annual report. ABP issued 1,066 service charge refunds for the total of approximately $3.2 million for the two refund periods in 2019. This represents roughly 41% of the service charge collected. ABP is working to improve producer confidence in our organization by demonstrating the value of the work done on their behalf with Alberta checkoff dollars. The ABP operations budget for the 2021 year is in the annual report. The ABP board has allocated $5 million for operations based on retained service charge revenue from the prior year and allocations from unrestricted net assets. The operations budget has been allocated as follows. 33% of the funds are allocated to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. The CCA membership assessment is based on Alberta's marketing. The cattle industry is reliant on trade and market access and remains essential for our success. Through CCA, ABP is involved in policy and trade advocacy efforts with federal governments as well as the U.S. and international markets. 3.5% is allocated to ABP governance and oversight. Expenses include the cost of having an elected board of directors, an executive, and audit and governance committees. They assist the Commission in carrying out the responsibilities to achieve Alberta Beef Producers' mission, which is to strengthen the sustainability and competitiveness of the beef industry for the benefit of Alberta beef producers. 3.5% is allocated to the government relations and ABP policy. Expenses include the cost to identify, examine, and address issues of importance to the Alberta cattle industry and to ensure that policies, regulations, and actions implemented by ABP and other cattle organizations and the government bodies support the interests of the Alberta cattle industry. 12.5% is allocated to marketing and communications. Expenses include the cost to communicate, inform, advise, and engage Alberta producers and to showcase Alberta beef and define the industry. Tactics used to communicate include cattle country, grassroots, and the use of social media platforms. The marketing efforts include a major marketing campaign and sponsorship. 3.5% is allocated to national policy, trade advocacy, and legal. ABP invests in efforts to promote policy, regulations, and programs to improve international market access, as well as CCA provincial members have agreed to share in the legal costs for international trade action. 7.5% is allocated to stakeholder relations. Expenses related to building stronger collaborative relations with Alberta producers, the media, youth in our industry, and industry stakeholders. Tools used to network with these key roles include the ABP annual report, the ABP AGM, and the semi-annual meetings, town hall meetings and webinars, stakeholder and producer meetings, and sponsorship of 4-H. 7.5% is allocated to research, production, and extension. Expenses related to the enhanced competitiveness of Alberta producers in the areas of research and production, long-term sustainable access to land and water, environment and watershed issues, wildlife, forage, and related issues. 12.5% is allocated to staff associated with programs. In order for ABP to achieve its vision of being a strong, clear, and representative voice working on behalf of cattle producers of Alberta, staff are needed to implement, execute, monitor, and report on programs. 16.5% is allocated to administrative expenses. This area reflects the office and administration expenses incurred to provide the infrastructure needed to support the business conducted by ABP.
Great, thank you all. If there's any questions for Brad and Laura, we have one that's come into the chat that's not financially related, and maybe I'll read it out to the audience tonight, and Dr. Melanie Woke, our vice chair, is going to answer it. Canada-Alberta BSE surveillance program testing in Alberta, I assume, is a high priority. In that regard, more emphasis needs to be put into the response time of BSE testing of the sample provided by the veterinarians. Currently, I had to wait 10 days to receive a negative test result in order to dispose of a dead cow. 10 days is unacceptable if you want Alberta beef producers to volunteer for the program. I would like to see the Alberta beef producers put a high importance in resolving this lab analysis turnaround of a sample submitted. If we want to meet the World Organization for Animal Health expectation of testing 10,564 animals in Canada, does ABP know the current number of BSE animals tested in Alberta in 2019? So I'll turn that question over to Melanie to answer.
So you're right, 10 days is way too long to wait to dispose of those carcasses, especially in the summertime. So I don't know what's going on in their labs, whether or not with the government cutbacks, possibly there may have been issues with the number of lab technicians and the ability for them to turn them around. I don't know the answer to that, but that's something that we can absolutely look into. We only have numbers to June of 2019. As of the end of June, there were 3,377 cows tested. So if we keep up on that, we're going to be, I believe, on target. Canada-wide for 2019 was over 30,000. So our numbers are looking pretty good. Hopefully, if we get the negligible risk status, those numbers might drop. But Kelly, did we have somebody from CCA that can answer that question?
Perhaps David Moss might be able to weigh in on that briefly.
No, I think that's about as much as we have at this point, Melanie and Kelly. So the 30,500, and we don't have it broken down by province in terms of CFI, in terms of numbers that they release. So yeah, and certainly the 10 days is too long. Completely agree.
Absolutely, and this would be also another great topic to bring forward to one of our resolution meetings next week as well. Okay, we have a couple more questions. We have a question from Jesse Williams. How does the amount of refunds compare to the previous years? Brad and Laura?
They remain consistent from the number of applications and the dollars being refunded.
Thank you, Laura.
And we have another question for you guys from Arnold Hansen. Where are most of the refunds going to?
Again, I'll let Laura address that. I think I know the answer, but
Well, just typically they would go to larger feedlots because they have more cows that they could request a feedlot, and that's been consistent all along as well.
yes.
Great. If there are no further questions, I'm seeing none come through the chat right now. As we said earlier, that if you continue to use the chat, we'll be able to answer some live through just a written response. And then we'll also be able to answer some at the end of the Q&A period at the end of the evening. So we'll move on now. I would like to touch on changes that the Alberta government made to research funding this year. After public consultations in January, the government developed an organization tasked with guiding Alberta's agriculture research priorities and ensuring that they reflect the needs of producers and the agriculture industry. ABP has been heavily involved in the initial consultations and engagement sessions that have helped shape results-driven agriculture research, also known as ARDAR. I was fortunate to be appointed as an interim board member by Minister Dreeshen. In 6 short months, ARDAR has held an initial call for proposals and is now in the review process. This is an exciting chapter for Alberta agriculture research, and I'm very proud to be a part of it. We have also been negotiating this year with our industry partners and Alberta Environment and Parks Department on the proposed updates to grazing lease contracts and the backlog of grazing lease transfers and renewals. In October, JBS announced a new partnership with a food service company based in Japan to supply branded Alberta beef product, utilizing some already established premium beef brands. This was an exciting announcement to our board, and it is wonderful to have Alberta beef recognized across the globe. I'm also happy to share that the Canadian Agri-Marketing Association recently recognized our marketing efforts at the Best of CAMA Awards. Through work done with our marketing agency, WS, we were awarded top prize in home series and single execution, print or digital, Best Overall Industry Relations Program, website, and the Certificate of Merit for Billboard. These awards were for our billboard campaign that I mentioned previously, as well as the short TV commercials this spring and our new consumer website. During the winter, we began our search for a new general manager as Rich Smith's retirement approached. The ABP executive worked with a hiring firm to hold an open competition, and our search concluded with ABP's marketing and education manager, Brad Dubois, moving into the role at the beginning of July. He has a phenomenal understanding of the industry and was able to jump right in during these uncertain times. Brad has some exciting ideas that he is going to tell you about now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kelly. First off, I'd like to thank the hiring committee and the ABP board of directors for the opportunity to serve cattle producers in this province as the general manager of Alberta beef producers. ABP and the Alberta beef brand is one of the most recognizable agricultural commodities in Alberta, and I'm excited to embrace the challenges of this new role. Taking a step back, during the process of interviewing for the general manager position, I was asked if I had any suggestions for the organization. I proposed that ABP could take a look at revitalizing their communications with producers so as to elevate producer awareness of the activities ABP is engaged in working on their behalf. I felt it was time to shake it up a bit, utilizing both traditional methods as well as new and exciting technology so as to reach as much of our demographic as possible. At my first board meeting in July, I introduced a new concept to the board in the form of a magazine. From that meeting, I was asked to come back with a business plan, working with ABP's marketing agency, WS. At our next board meeting, we presented a new communications platform outlining a new strategy for communicating with producers, which embraced both traditional and the most modern communication tools. The plan passed unanimously, and I'm excited to share some of those details of what's coming in January 2021. Share my screen. We are striving to establish ourselves as the leading knowledge resource for beef production, both locally and globally, by redefining our communications approach while building on ABP's brand. The new approach will include a digital content platform, notification app, and a printed magazine. Our goals are to firmly establish Alberta beef producers as the leading knowledge hubs for beef production regionally, nationally, and globally, to be recognized as a source for trusted, relevant information, to help find new markets to drive the industry forward for both producer and consumer marketplaces, to be recognized as a leader in beef production knowledge, and to cost effectively and more efficiently reach audiences with more of the information they need. This will replace our current grassroots newsletter, Cattle Country on the radio, and placing ads in other publications. When it comes to the app, producers will receive notifications for urgent messaging, including disease notifications, weather alerts, and topics personally selected by the individual. Our online communications hub acts as a daily resource and the platform for the information that's most relevant to producers. It will include content such as market reports, research technology, global affairs, business management, trends, and what's happening within Alberta beef producers, both the organization and individuals. And the magazine will be produced and delivered quarterly and include relevant information within that time frame. At our last board meeting, we recommended that the name for the magazine and the platform, that ABP will be the name for the magazine and the platform. This will be voted on by the board at our next board meeting in December. The reason for this is the platform's goal is intended to reach one of Alberta beef producers' primary mandates for communication and promotion by becoming the source of beef information recognized by members across Canada and globally. Utilizing ABP as the name of the platform signals the next evolution of the organization as the provider of communication and knowledge to advance beef production. A couple of examples are the Toronto Dominion Bank that switched to TD and the Royal Bank of Canada that now calls themselves RBC. And what makes ABP different? It is producer first. It's driven by content. It will aggregate data based on what you want to hear, read, or see about in the beef industry, and even from outside the industry. ABP is in both its printed and digital forms is content driven, Unlike existing newsletters and publications, this medium will be driven by audience engagement. What producers want to consume will tell us what to publish more of. And what's the difference? Advertising revenue is designated to offset production costs, but it is not our primary driver. The advertising approach is highly targeted, using the latest in digital technology to match buyers and sellers more effectively, creating new channels for like-minded businesses to connect. We hope you are excited to see the rollout of this new venture for Alberta beef producers and where it can take the organization starting in January 2021. Before I finish up, I'd just like to take this opportunity, though, to remind everybody that's joined us tonight to please remember to vote in the Southwest and the Southeast zones. You can utilize the online platform or the mail-in ballot. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Brad. We do have a few questions for you, so please don't run away yet. Our first question we have for you is from Dennis Lestuca. Is with the removal of certain communication items and the implementation of a new Alberta Beef magazine, how will you disseminate it?
So the whole idea is we'll be utilizing our list, our current list that we use for our grassroots newsletter that we send out, and we will be sending that to that mailing list for at least the first 2 issues. There has been maybe some discussion at the executive that maybe we could go further, but that will depend on affordability. But we will be utilizing the same list that comes from that we utilize for grassroots at this point in time as we start down this path.
Perfect. It looks like you answered Dennis's question as well. We also have a question. My apologies for not getting this name right, so I won't even attempt it. But we have a question that would like to know, though, as a whole beef industry is very big, and what kinds of things ABP can help those small businesses, if any, and small owners of farm. Thanks. So, you know, in a nutshell, depending on your age, we do have, the beef industry does have different programs such as the CYL program through the Canadian Cattlemen's Association for producers under 35. But essentially, ABP, our work is to benefit the industry as a whole, no matter the size of the corporation or the operation. And there are some programs that are available, such as the CYL program. If you'd like, you could always reach out to the office and we can help you get into touch with those kind of programs. Awesome.
There's another one down there.
Oh, is there? Okay. So for you, Brad, another question from an anonymous attendee. I rely on Cattle Country for my primary source for producer information while I'm in the truck and tractor. Will there be something similar with the new platform?
Yes. First of all, what I want to be able to share with everyone is in the event that ABP needs to utilize our app as well as say our digital platform, and we wanted to get back on radio, we are considering that we will bring Cattle Country back in if there's a pointed message on something that's happening in the industry that we need to connect with producers on. We'll use every medium that we can and that's at our disposal. But for regular, more consistent chats, we can get that through the app, where we can push out some notifications, and the app will include daily, weekly, and monthly content. So you will be able to identify the type of information that suits you most, and that will be directly to you. So all of the stuff that you do here on Cattle Country, we will utilize our digital platform as well as the app to push it out. And of course the magazine, depending on what's coming up in the future, that we can push out in the magazine as well. So we'll have more opportunity to drive home some of this messaging directly to producers through the different formats that we're about to embrace.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Brad. You know, we as a board, we have been so looking forward to unveiling this to our fellow producers, all of the new information, our new communications, and we've been looking forward to connecting them with them on a whole new platform. See, that's my joke for tonight. See, and it never works when you're when you're not in a live thing, it never works. Fabulous. So it looks like we may have covered all of the questions that I can see in Q&A. If there's anything in chat, we're not monitoring it. So if you wouldn't mind moving anything that might be in chat over to the Q&A so that we can keep track of it, that would be fabulous. We'll maybe try and have a peek later on. If we have no more questions for Brad, we will now move into our reports from our industry partners. So tonight we have Brian Perrier, Canfax manager and senior analyst, with a brief update on market conditions. I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
All right, thanks, and good evening, everybody. Let's see if I can share my screen. Hopefully somebody can let me know. One sec. Is that working?
You've got it. Great
Okay,
job.
well, this one's going to be pretty quick. I only got a few minutes, so just going to go over some of the highlights to kind of cover what's happened in 2019. Obviously, it's been a hectic year, and well, it hasn't been overly positive, I guess, from the cattle market standpoint, but there has been some positive outcomes of it. But you see that. But I guess so to start here, here's Canadian cattle slaughter. Obviously, a lot of questions about backlogs of cattle. How many cattle have we processed versus where we should have been? And as you can see, the massive drop in the spring, in April, I guess, would have been more so, some of the lowest kills we've seen in 40, 50 years in Western Canadian slaughter. But as you can see, the red line, basically the packing plants have done an incredible job of rebounding on their production side, basically exceeding a year ago. You can see this last week, Canadian cattle slaughter was 71,000 head. This is just fed cattle slaughter. And that's one of the biggest slaughters we've seen in the last 10 years. Since the middle of June, we've processed 60,000 more fed cattle. And for the most part, we've worked through, there's roughly 130,000 head at the peak, 120,000. We've worked through a lot of those cattle. We've focused on killing fat cattle versus cows. We've also had a lot less placements. So we've been trying to get more current, but we still are, the backlog shrunk significantly. We've got a lot more cattle on feed, the 120 days or more. Carcass weights were record large a few weeks ago, but they're starting to come down. And if these processing plants can continue to work through these numbers, we're hoping we're getting towards the end of it. But it's a slow recovery, just given how many cattle we had versus packing plants. We just don't have enough shackle space across Canada. And this is going to weigh a little bit on the market into 2021, we believe, as well, just because we had more placements later in the year. That's going to funnel into the 2021 market. But in the last few weeks, they've put about 30,000 head of cattle on the set aside. That's going to push them into January as well. So we'll have to see if there's implications there, or how long we continue with cattle on the set aside program to help manage some of these inventories. From a stats, we've got about 30% more cattle on feed 120 days or more, which is kind of an indicator that there's still some cattle out there that need to be worked through the system. With that, we've seen, the fed cattle market, your graph on the left, again, volatile as the market shut down this spring, but it's been very flat over the summer, but somewhat disappointing. Obviously, fed cattle prices into the 130s. It's meaning ongoing feedlot losses through the fall, or through the summer and through the fall so far. And, seasonally, we start to see that uptick. You can see, kind of looking at the last few years, usually as you head into December, late November, early December, we see the markets rallying. We're just not seeing that, as I said, with a lot of big cattle and, a little bit of still concern about shackle space, or concern about another COVID issues at plants and slowdowns. So guys are maybe a little bit more motivated in this market situation to sell fats. Again, nothing at this point has shown any issues around the packing plant capacity. As I just said, they've had some huge weeks killing Saturdays and such, but it's still an overhanging fear of the marketplace somewhat. Hopefully, and we expect, barring any kind of issues at packing plants, that these markets can pick up a little bit into the new year, but it's just maybe going to be a little bit more muted than normal. And then you can see on the calf prices, obviously, that's calf prices for the most part have been very resilient. I'm not sure if you can, what your screen looks like. Anyway, I hope you can see towards the end here, in the last couple of weeks, calf prices have bounced back up to a year ago levels. 5-weight calves, they're nothing to scream home about. But given the situation with the feedlot prices, you look at feed costs, you look at feedlot losses, Canadian dollar creeping up. The fact that calf prices are as high as a year ago is somewhat a positive out of this marketplace. A lot of these calves still, the feedlots are aggressive. We've seen feedlot expansion, and they're aggressively buying calves. And basically gambling on the market heading into 2021. Hopefully as we work through these numbers, there's going to be less calves around. We got a smaller smaller calf crop in the United States. We're going to have a little bit smaller calf crop in Canada. If we can work through, this next few months, we do see some strong indicators of, market recovery. Beef demand has been extremely strong through all this. And with less cattle around, usually that should result in higher prices. The cow market as well, the fed cattle prices have moved to a discount to the United States. They've gotten more current faster than us. Cow prices have struggled this fall a little bit. We had an extremely strong cow market for years, or last 3-4 years, where we were at a premium to the United States. Just given these market situations right now, we just don't have the shackle space for everything. So our cow market is similar to the Fed market. We're kind of a $5 to $10 discount to the United States. We're back to a floor price on the cows as well. As cow prices have struggled, but very much similar market factors to the fed cattle industry or fed cattle market. Just looking quickly at the Canadian dollar is creeping up 77 cents, or just flirting with 77 cents right now. Much above the 70-cent point this spring. Big part of that is the weaker the weaker US dollar. A lot of this, the commodity, the grain prices here, the chart on the right, you can see barley prices kind of shooting through the roof, well over $6 a bushel into Lethbridge, and even higher, $6.35, well over $6 into the new year for booking in barley. So that's becoming a challenge. But, part of this is, I think, some of this grain market. There's been a surge in Chinese demand buying barley and US corn. The lower US dollars helping some of these commodity markets run higher, but not quite as friendly to the cattle markets as we've seen on the grain market side. As I said, these are all sort of some headwinds that the feedlots are somewhat gambling on when they're paying up for these price of calves of where they are. Obviously, we'd all want calf prices higher, but in respect to how the other markets and market signals are going, they're still gambling on the market when placing these calves. Just a quick chart. Obviously, there's should almost cut that big peak out of there. Obviously, you don't have enough beef around. Prices skyrocketed this spring, but as you can see, and as we head into November, December here at the end of the red line on the chart, we've got beef prices above a year ago, again exceeding expectations. There's maybe a little bit of panic buying even at some of the retailers in the States where consumers again stocking up on beef, and that's helping the retail margins and the wholesale prices for sure. It's hopefully as an incentive, the packers are obviously making a lot of money. Nobody denies that. But they're killing as many cattle as possible, and the faster we can get through that, certainly some positivity there. As I said, hopefully the cattle producer can gain leverage and get a bigger market share of the meat dollar heading into 2021. If you're looking for more Canfax information, there might, that's kind of all I'm going to cover really, really briefly from that perspective. But if you want more information, you can go to our website. Happy to take a few questions if you want, or towards the end.
That's great, Brian. Thank you so much. I'm just waiting to see if any questions pop up for you, but you'll be able to stay and answer some questions later on, will you?
Yeah, I should be around. Yeah.
Okay, fabulous. Look at us, we're actually running a couple minutes ahead of schedule. So this evening, we have a video presentation from the Canadian Cattlemen's Association with Executive Vice President Dennis Laycraft leading off their update on several national policy files. CCA General Manager David Moss will be available after this brief clip to answer some questions.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to give you a CCA update at your virtual town hall, and certainly looking forward to providing an update in person in the future. We're going to talk about a number of items that CCA has been very active on here. I'm going to start and give a little update on some changes in our structure and begin with some of the work we've done on the COVID response. As you take a look at our organization, we're really into two parts. We have the CCA division, which most people associate with the CCA. Then we have our operating divisions, which are a range of services that we help provide to the industry. Under that range of services, we have Canfax. We also provide support services for the Beef Cattle Research Council, the Public and Stakeholder Engagement, a new division of CCA, and to the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Pleased to report that the Canadian beef breeds have also now joined CCA as an operating division, which again is that sort of evidence of the industry coming closer and closer together. I will say on the policy side, something new you'll see there is our Food Policy Committee. We've shifted because of all of the issues that are out there related to the food guide, related to labeling of products out there, that this is a much more active area for the CCA. Just quickly on our revenue for the policy division, that's the portion that's funded out of the provincial checkoff. Those assessments are based on the size of the industry in each province, and naturally Alberta and Saskatchewan are our two largest beef producing provinces in Canada. Under our budget allocation, again, something to note in there, we are continuing to put considerable emphasis on our Young Cattlemen's program. Our trade activities are our biggest expense, but between the Young Cattlemen and our food policy, there are areas we're continuing to concentrate more on, and I certainly know there's a number of graduates of our Young Cattlemen's program that are not now part of the Alberta beef producers. Quickly on our COVID response, back in March 15th, we put in place our emergency response plan. That pulled together the entire industry under procedures set up with the National Beef Strategy. And since that time, we've been having weekly meetings of the group to ensure that we've got the right steps in place. Our primary focus during that was on business continuity. How did we make sure that the borders remained open, that we could continue to see commerce occur, that we got agriculture deemed as an essential service, that the inspection at plants remained available, and did everything we could to make sure that procedures were placed and protective equipment was available. We also really started an unprecedented level of communications with town halls and scrums, and really working closely with the provinces on that. And then we did sponsor some activities with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, sort of building on this heightened awareness that Canadians have about food in Canada and about Canadian agriculture. And we continue to work on that. And then we did recommend a number of disaster relief measures, but also really focusing on improvements to our business risk management programs, which Brady will talk about later. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fawn Jackson to talk about some of our priorities in Ottawa.
Thank you, Dennis. So I'm going to be talking about trade. And certainly this year with COVID, trade has had its challenges, but I think that fundamentally there's still great opportunity for the beef sector. One of the facts that I like to speak to is that in the last number of years, the agriculture sector has grown 3 times faster than the average Canadian exports. So not only is there opportunity, but there's certainly recognition that that agriculture is going to be one of the key sectors driving Canada out of the economic strife that COVID-19 has brought. So certainly this year, the US is, of course, one of our key markets, or the biggest market for us. And so it was really great to see the new NAFTA come into force in July of this year. Something that we had been very careful to monitor throughout the negotiations was that mandatory country of origin labeling didn't come back. Certainly with transition in government in the US pending, we also are being very mindful of continuing to communicate with different stakeholders in the US about how important integration is and will always be for our market. So keeping a watch on MCOOL and making sure that it doesn't have a resurgence. Certainly on the trade front, where we see growth is in the Asian region. And we think that we can tackle the opportunity there through a number of different ways. So certainly through CPTPP expansion, which really drove, last year we saw a 17% increase in the value of Canadian beef exports was really from largely due to CPTPP. And we would like to see other stakeholders join that trade pact. So economies such as Taiwan, Thailand, South Korea, these are all really interesting potential new trading partners that we could work with even more than we do today. Certainly Europe, with CETA that came into force in 2017, has shown its value, and it's also shown the challenges in shipping to the European market. The European market is a very high value market for us. So, the value per kilo can be between that $12 and $17 range, depending on the country, whereas our next some of our next highest would be around the $9 per kilo range. So when we're cutting up that carcass and getting $600 more in value if we were compared to if we were only able to sell into the Canadian market, so $600 more because we can sell into these markets, having access to markets like Europe is really important for us. That being said, of course, Europe has been challenging for us to access for a number of different reasons. And so we're going to continue to work within Canada to expand the program, its capabilities to do more auditing, as well as continuing to have conversations with our European counterparts to identify ways that we can further enable two-way trade, because they've certainly done very well in the Canadian market. And so we'll be continuing to push the Canadian government to have those conversations. Of course, in terms of the EU, the UK and the exit from the EU is certainly top of mind because Canada just announced our transition agreement. As the beef industry, we recognize the importance of continuity, but our key focus and our key message to the federal government is that we need a more ambitious, a more meaningful free trade agreement with the UK in the future, and that we encourage them to come back to the negotiating table and to complete those negotiations as soon as possible. Going on to the next slide. As I said previously, COVID-19 certainly saw significant challenges for us that were both felt by producers at the farm gate, but also in our ability to do some trade. So certainly with this reduction in fed slaughter, it certainly impacted our ability to export. Largely, we have seen our exports recover, and in September of this year, we were actually just slightly above our 5-year average for the value of exports. So while we appreciated it that Canadians were able to continue eating beef with increased exports from the US, for example, we now, of course, have reestablished our slaughter capacity and are going to be competing avidly within the Canadian market to get those consumers back. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Larry, who's going to give an update on environment.
Thank you, Fawn. It's Larry Thomas here with the Environment Manager of Canadian Cattlemen's Association. I'd like to give you an update on some of the files we're working on. Under the Fisheries Act regulations development, the CCA, along with other agricultural sector stakeholders, have engaged with senior DFO staff in an effort to ensure producer interests are represented in the development of standards, codes of practice, and prescribed works regulations under the Fisheries Act. Most recently, DFO posted 6 interim codes of practice. 2 of those codes, beaver dam removal and culvert maintenance, present concern. CCA staff had submitted to DFO alternative wording and have asked for a clear guidance on several aspects of these codes. An informal ag advisory group, including CCA, Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and the Canadian Canola Growers Association, have also submitted to DFO a list of activities, works, and undertakings requiring codes or exemption from authorizations. This consultation process and regulation development will continue into 2023. Under the Navigational Protection Act Minor Works Order, Transport Canada has entered into a consultation process on revisions to the Minor Works Order under the Navigation Protection Act. A minor work is anything that could slightly impact navigation of a water body but would not require authorization. The CCA had recommended, among other things, that agricultural work structures and activities be added to the Minor Works Order, essentially exempting. CCA had also recommended that Transport Canada define and add minor waters on agricultural lands, small creeks, and etc., to the Minor Works Order. This consultation has entered phase 2, and the CCA continues to work with Transport Canada officials to address several of our outstanding concerns related to this act and regulation. With regards to invasive wild pigs, at the CCA semi-annual meeting in August, the board passed a resolution for the CCA to lobby all levels of government to develop a coordinated strategy to eradicate wild pigs across the country. Recent research at the University of Saskatchewan indicates the range and occurrence of wild pigs has increased significantly over the past decade. Occurrences are most prevalent in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, but are also on the rise in Ontario and parts of British Columbia. Concerns focus on crop damage, damage to sensitive ecosystems, including habitat for at-risk species, and the biosecurity risks regarding disease spread to commercial hog operations. Finally, the 2030 industry goal setting exercise, collectively, the 7 primary beef cattle national organizations are developing a suite of 10-year to 2030 goals. This becomes a single set of 7 goals all national beef organizations shall work to achieve together. These are ambitious yet realistic goals, providing positive and clear messaging outlining how the Canadian beef industry is striving for incremental continual improvements. These goals will position the Canadian beef industry to communicate it is part of the climate solution, to build government and public support for beef production and related activities with emphasis on the economic, social, and environmental benefits to Canadians. 3 of the goals have been released addressing greenhouse gas and carbon sequestration, land use and biodiversity, and animal health and welfare. Goals for water, beef quality and food safety, people health and safety, and technology will be complete and released in early 2021. More information is available at beefstrategy.com. Thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of your meeting, and I'll pass it along to Brady.
Thanks, Larry. I'm Brady Stanicki. I work on CCA's domestic ag policy. A key focus of this committee is business risk management programs. On agri-stability, CCA is calling for the reference margin limit to be eliminated, the $3 million payment cap to be increased, and to increase the payment trigger to 85% of the reference margin. Industry worked with MNP to develop detailed analysis on why these specific program changes are needed to make the program more effective for cattle producers. This has been presented to numerous provincial and national governments who do appreciate industry bringing additional evidence and solutions to the table. CCA President Bob Lowe also presented these recommendations to FPT Ag ministers earlier this week. We expect a decision to be made on agri-stability reform at the conclusion of the FPT meeting on November 27th. On livestock price insurance, CCA believes that the Western Livestock Price Insurance Program should become a permanent program and not dependent on renewal from one ag policy framework to the next. We know this program is key for young cattle producers in managing price risk and accessing financing. CCA also continues to lobby for the program to be expanded into a pilot that can be delivered into the maritime provinces. CCA has also recommended that the livestock tax deferral provision be improved by expanding eligibility beyond breeding stock only and allow for the individual election of the provision rather than a geographic determination. This would reduce the risk of excluding access for producers who fall outside the boundary lines but are still dealing with extreme weather challenges. CCA presented the aforementioned program recommendations to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture during their business risk management study this summer. The report was released last week, and we are pleased that nearly all of our recommendations were adopted by the committee. This provides an important pathway to work with government on improving these programs. Labor is also a key issue. Labor shortages at the farm level and in beef processing continue to be a risk to growth opportunities and overall competitiveness of Canada's beef producers. CCA played a role in lobbying for the agri-food immigration pilot, which was launched this spring. This pilot is dedicated to providing pathways to permanent residency for workers employed in primary beef production today. Finally, CCA continues to work with all of agriculture to lobby for the implementation of a national ag labor strategy called the Workforce Action Plan to increase the skills and labor supply of workers in agriculture and food processing. We continue to place a high emphasis on the labor issues moving forward. I'll now pass it over to David Moss.
Thanks, Brady. I should mention that Brady and I both staff the Animal Health and Care Committee. Brady mentioned a number of files that he's working on specifically, and you can see on the slide here some of the ones that I work on more closely perhaps. So we'll go through some of these items here today: negligible risk application, specified risk material, FMD vaccine bank, and Animal Health Canada. In terms of negligible risk, for the past year, CCA co-chaired an industry government task team to develop Canada's application to the OIE for BSE negligible risk designation. The application was completed and submitted in advance of the July 31st deadline. The application now sits with the OIE Review Committee. We anticipate a recommendation will be provided in March of 2021, with a final announcement expected in May of 2021. Moving Canada to negligible risk opens the door for Canada to initiate a review of our specified risk material protocols and will assist with market access to countries like South Korea and the EU. In terms of SRM, with the success of the BSE submission, and CFI and CCA are preparing a very similar approach to the SRM review. An industry government task team held their initial kickoff meeting on November 19th with over 40 industry and government representatives in attendance. Industry's objectives are to align the US short list of SRM removal, which would have a significant impact on our treatment of OTM cattle, which can be upwards of $40 per head in additional SRM removal costs in comparison to our international competitors, and an estimated $36 million in annual savings to producers. In terms of the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank, CFI modeling has shown that a foot and mouth disease outbreak in highly populated livestock regions would represent one of the worst case scenarios for Canada and would require between 1.9 million and 2.7 million doses of FMD vaccine. We currently have a significant shortfall in available emergency vaccine, and the 14-week time frame to produce the vaccine represents a significant risk to the livestock industry and to the Canadian economy, It is estimated a large FMD outbreak in Canada could have over a $60 billion impact to our gross domestic product. CCA is strongly encouraging the government to establish a Canadian FMD bank with 30 million doses consisting of 2.5 each of 12 different FMD vaccine concentrates. So why the push now for a Canadian FMD vaccine bank? A few things have changed globally. They're impacting this and really putting us on the priority to get this passed and get this initiated. The US has approved funding to develop a US only vaccine bank and has made it clear that their bank would not be shared with their trading partners. Mexico has pulled out of the North American FMD vaccine bank due to financial constraints. Canada's allocation from this source is limited to only 250,000 doses, which leaves us well short of our projected needs. In 2018, the OIE approved the use of containment zones and the harmonization of waiting periods for vaccinated animals, which has opened the door to use FMD vaccines, especially in large outbreaks. As well, the development of what's called DIVA vaccines, differentiated from vaccinated animal vaccines. Having access to this type of vaccine allows a containment zone to be initiated and animals that are vaccinated to be differentiated from those that have the disease from natural causes. It really provides a very effective tool to manage those animals through a vaccine and through a disease outbreak. The last I wanted to cover was the Animal Health and Care, the Animal Health Canada initiative. Animal Health Canada is a joint industry government multi-species initiative to proactively address the real threat of foreign animal disease outbreak in Canada. The vision of Animal Health Canada is to build an emergency response model that helps drive action across a comprehensive animal health strategy, including priority areas such as disease surveillance, biosecurity, traceability, emergency response, vaccine deployment, and a number of other areas. CCA is an active partner in this initiative and is co-chair of both the working group and the Champions Committee guiding this initiative. And last week, the federal, provincial, territory meetings have been held and was strongly endorsed by the ministers as an initiative to go forward with. So we were working hard on this. We feel that One Health approach is a very important way to help in a disease outbreak. And we're certainly seeing the effects of that cooperation through this current pandemic. So I think I'll stop there and pass it over to you, Dennis, for a few closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and Brady, Larry, and Fawn. I certainly wish we could be there to answer any questions in person, but clearly you can either reach us directly or we'll regularly convene forums where we'll hopefully be able to share information and answer any inquiries that you do have. One of the things I always want to do is thank our provincial members. CCA is an umbrella organization. By that I mean, we're made up of the provincial cattlemen's associations, and I always remind people to be on our board of directors, you actually have to be an active cattle producer. So, it's always, our honor to work on your behalf and with the rest of our national industry partners, as well as we move forward with the national strategy. So with that, I hope the rest of your meeting goes very well, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in the near future.
Thank you all at CCA. You definitely all have been incredibly busy on our behalf. David was able to answer a few questions during the presentation. They are available in the question and answer. Sean Wilson had a great question about the difference in the packing industry profits and perhaps the cow-calf sector. And if you wanted to scroll through, have a look at David's answer. He's given a very comprehensive answer, but we have been at ABP as well, working with our industry partners like CCA, monitoring this and have definitely been keeping it at a forefront. We also had a question from Colin Campbell that David was able to answer. that about the current ask of UK by Canada. And if you scroll through that Q&A, you'll be able to see the David's answer as well, in which he's just mentioned that the current terms are a bridge agreement between UK utilizing the current CETA agreement. But specifically, we're not sure on the terms with beef trade quota levels into the UK and access to Canada. So we also had another question from Colin Campbell, and I'll maybe just stop here. And if Brian is available to answer it, I'll let him, if Brian could pop up here. So Colin Campbell has asked, when 500 to 600 pound steer prices are so closely grouped for the first 6 months of the year for 2018, 19, and 20, why is the 5-year average for these calves anywhere from 20 to 30 cents higher? And what has drove this spread?
Well, basically the 5-year average is just that, the 5-year average. And if you think back in the 5-year average, we've included is 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. And basically it's the extremely high prices we saw in the first, in 2015 and 2016, before prices really dropped hard into the fall of 2016, and then have been very level, basically through 18 and 19. So it's simply the high prices of 2015 and 2016 in the first half of those years inflating that 5-year average. So it was just sort of how the markets changed from those extremely high peaks in 2014 and then to today. So hopefully that answers it.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. We have a question here that I'm going to give to Brad Dubois from J Cross. This year has seen record numbers of people heading into nature in Alberta and not just into designated parks. I have seen and heard about more frequent cases of people illegally accessing private lands, in some cases with fences cut and property damaged. With limited space in parks, this problem will get worse and will obviously be further compounded by the Alberta government plan to close parks. Has ABP heard this also? And what efforts have been made to express concern to government about the consequences of their parks plan for private landowners who are largely ranchers and farmers? Is the message being heard by government? I'm going to turn that over to you, Brad. We've had a great meeting, or had a meeting here recently with the minister. I'll turn it over to you to answer that.
Yeah, so just a couple of weeks ago, myself and some of the executive met with Minister Nixon to have this conversation, this issue and several other issues. We did stress this situation and what our producers are experiencing with people trespassing onto their lands and so forth. And he definitely heard our concerns. We made essentially through ourselves, the RMA, the Rural Municipalities Association, and the government have decided that, or come from that meeting, that we would try and work together to educate people on where they can go and where they cannot go, and basically make a real effort to try and slow people, or basically stop the whole situation with individuals trespassing, especially on private lands. So there was I wouldn't say an agreement, but definitely where we did communicate that we would work together. And I have been in touch with RMA, and now it's great to have Mark Linsing with us as our new GR person, Government Relations and Policy. And we'll be getting Mark connected with the individual at RMA to start the groundwork on what needs to be done there first. And then we'll bring the Alberta government in, and together the three of us will hopefully be able to come up with some sort of plan and solution to this situation. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Brad. That's definitely a great question, and absolutely one that we have been working on. Another one that would...
If I could, I apologize for interrupting, Kelly, but Caitlin also just brought to my attention, we also ran communications on social media throughout the summer to encourage appropriate behavior on public lands. So that was something that we tried to stay very consistent on in sending messaging out. Sorry, Kelly.
No, you're great. And this is another, just another great example of something that could be brought forward as a resolution. to one of our resolution meetings next week, and you are more than welcome to send us an email with your resolution that you would like brought forward, and if you can attend the meeting, that would be fabulous. So I'm going to send another question to David Moss from Lauren Dack. The market for grass-fed beef locally and overseas seems to be growing exponentially. Is the CCA researching this trend and offering advice to producers who want to grow grass-fed beef?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, I don't want to put Andrea on the spot, but certainly from a research perspective, Andrea probably might have some thoughts on this. Certainly the EU market is, you know, it's hormone-free, so it lends itself well to a grass-fed type program. Also the A&W's got their program happening right now. So and then of course COVID, I think there's been a lot of consumer awareness of buying local, and that for a lot of consumers seems to think needs to be grass-fed. So I think there's been some pandemic driven aspect to that as well as the market itself. So yes, and Andrea, I'm sure you have a few thoughts on grass-fed research and some of the stuff we're doing in that space as well, and certainly the regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, I think, you know, it is growing. I think from a marketing perspective, it's probably growing more than the actual growth in the market size to some extent. And some of that's driven by the sourcing of that beef. Some of it's cow beef that's coming through, but there is definitely growth. And I think the biggest thing there is we provide resources, which I'll talk about shortly here, on an array of production technologies and techniques. And I think that it's pretty well researched in terms of the area, in terms of opportunities for grass-fed production, grain-fed production. So there's lots out there. But we haven't actually necessarily seen a huge demand for materials at this point in this area.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. And I think this is a great segue where we can lead into our presentation from Andrea for BCRC. I'm being told that I'm running on Smith time, which is always about 10 minutes late. So I'm going to pass it over to you and welcome, Andrea. And I look forward to your presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me here tonight. I know we have limited time and I see lots of questions coming through that I hope we can get answered for you. So my goal is to give you a very small snippet of what we do. We fund research of priority for the industry across Canada. We're funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff, and we're really focused on supporting industry sustainability, economic sustainability. So we focus on things like productivity, but we are also focused on research around things like the environmental footprint of beef, animal welfare, and those areas where public trust is a question, and also regulation and policy. We also oversee the Verified Beef Production Plus program at a national level with both its training and accreditation. So I'm just going to try and give you a quick overview of a sample of projects. We have 70 plus projects underway in both research and extension at this point in time. But we're doing a lot of different work and we do a lot of work on productivity, but sometimes we also do work that informs regulation and policy. One example is we felt like we were pretty well positioned when it came to animal transport, thanks to work actually funded by ABP and Beef Farmers of Ontario. But with the regulations that came forward, what we realized is we didn't have data around the impact of rest stops in cattle. And while it sounds great to rest those cattle, I think most producers inherently understand unloading and loading cattle does not necessarily always reach the outcomes that maybe our public wants. So we initiated a project that basically looked at the impacts of transport times and rest times. And we basically the project is still underway. The first year results were kind of interesting though, in that it showed that rest stops did not have a consistent effect on physical or behavioral measures, which was unexpected. Conditioned calves did benefit from shorter trips, but they did not see reduced indicators of fatigue, dehydration, or stress, which are the things often people are worried about when they were rested. So we are doing additional work. A second year of the study is actually now complete, but we're waiting for the published results on newly weaned calves and also longer transport times, because I think one of the things we recognize is some of our longer transport times involved unloading calves at Thunder Bay and then carrying them forward into areas like Guelph and Ontario. So we continue to work in areas like this. We also are doing work related to things like the environmental footprint. The industry hasn't always been painted with the best picture, but what we do is we know we have a great story to tell. We do contribute positively to our environment and things like carbon sequestration. And we also have a great story to tell in terms of our declining environmental footprint. But we need to have numbers around that to demonstrate that and validate that, especially when challenged in the public. And so we've been working on work in this area. Results are actually just coming out in terms of our contribution to biodiversity, which is a great news story for our industry as well. One of the other areas that we recognize is beef. There's a lot of discussion about plant-based proteins, and beef hasn't always received the attention it's due. We know it's a superfood, but we need to be able to put that to the public. And so we looked at the nutrient density and nutritional value of beef compared with other meat and plant-based protein sources. And basically what it said is to get equivalent protein to 100 grams of beef, you have to eat a lot more nuts and a lot more vegetables. This means consuming about 2 times the calories for those vegetables and 4 times the calories for those nuts. And what that does is, of course, result in higher cost in terms of actually consuming that. So putting numbers to these understandings and making sure consumers know the benefits of beef, not just from an environmental landscape point, but also in terms of what we can do in terms of meeting their nutrient requirements. And these are things where we're working very closely with our partners through Canada Beef and the public stakeholder engagement. Our job is to generate the science, their job is to take it to the next level and work with the public and consumers. The other big focus I just want to cover today is on extension. We do a lot of extension-based work. We recognize a lot of provincial governments moved away from extension, and we need to make sure innovation is getting to producers and other stakeholders. So we have our website. We don't have extension agents across the country, but we do provide comprehensive resources. So I'd encourage you to take a look at our website if you haven't already. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter. If for no other reason, then you could find things that benefit your operation, but also it will help you gain an understanding of what your national checkoff funding is going towards under the research realm. We have a lot of topic pages that we're constantly filling up and providing based on producer feedback in terms of areas they want to see new content. We also have our monthly newsletter, which we try to time with when producers are making different production systems. There's a picture of our blog. Dr. Reynold Bergen, who's our science director, you'll probably recognize his name if you read the Canadian Cattlemen magazine. So we try to reach through multiple venues, and actually we look forward to working with Alberta beef producers to share our content with you as well as they launch their new platform. Any way we can get information out to producers, we look forward to the opportunity. One of the interesting things we have learned, though, in the last while is there's also great appetite for webinars. We have a webinar coming up December 2nd. I'd encourage you to register. This one's on reproductive failure in the beef herd. And a lot of our focus on innovation isn't just having researchers talk to producers, but bringing experts throughout the industry, because one of the things we know is researchers generate a lot of great information, but implementation is part of it too, and understanding the practicalities of that implementation. With that in mind, we've also learned that producers have a lot of great innovations on their farm. Our council is some of the most innovative people I know, so it is producer-led. And at this point in time, what we've realized is whenever we launch an article that talks about producers and what they're innovating on farm, we actually see quite a bit of uptake. So we've launched in 2020 a series of articles that actually profiles the innovations that our producers from the council are implementing on their own farms. You'll see Fred Lozman there in the picture, who's heavily involved with Alberta beef producers and our finance chair for Beef Cattle Research Council. So this is the type of materials we also try to generate and provide to the industry. I love watching them share stories even across the country. It's amazing what's relevant in Nova Scotia and totally applicable in Alberta as well. Last but not least, we do have a series of decision-making tools. One of the things that we recognized with extension is providing research is one thing to producers, but making sure that we support producers as they make that decision-making, go through the decision-making process, because there's things like labor and economics and money that we have to consider when we talk about adopting new innovations. So we have a series of producer decision-making tools on our website. Some of them have been developed by us, others we've developed in partnership with others. Actually, the tool for evaluating feed test results was developed in Alberta. And this one was really interesting. We spent a lot of time seeing issues around reproductive failure. Producers had concerns also in terms of feed being its largest single variable cost, aside from a feeder animal, let's say. And what we focused with them on encouraging them to get feed tests. Many producers got feed tests, but then they said, well, what does the feed test mean? And so this tool was developed with the idea that you could select your class of cattle. So in this case, mature cows. You could select your stage of production for those animals. You can enter their weight, and then you enter your feed test data. And what it does is it allows you to see green means good, you're good to go with that feed. Yellow means you should probably watch those indicators, and red means you probably need to, supplement your feed. It might be time to talk to a nutritionist or go do some research in terms of opportunities. And we actually do have supplementary information to support that decision-making process, as well as you look to perhaps buy feed, those types of things. Likewise, we recognize that a lot of people graze forages, and a lot of focus, especially as we talk things like regenerative agriculture, is on improving our forage and grass stands, improving productivity. And so one of the big things there is ensuring your carrying capacity is right for the land you have. So a calculator was developed that basically looks at pasture management and ensuring appropriate carry capacity. There's two methods you can use for this calculator. The first is just looking at estimates based on provincial forage production guides. The second is actually supporting producers in terms of how they can field-based sample, gather those field samples, and then ultimately move you through the decision-making process and give you total animal unit months or days that you can graze that capacity or that land. And we look forward to feedback on all of these tools, by the way. I would say they are tools, they're not perfect, they don't cover every situation, but what they're encouraged to do is support producers as they go through the decision-making process. And definitely what we see is the more feedback we have, the stronger they are. The last one was another partnership. It was a collaboration of multiple organizations, of which Alberta Beef Producers was involved. And it's our Forage UPIC tool. It basically covers Western Canada. And it was met with very positive feedback with the idea we talk a lot about forage stand improvement, encouraging producers to perhaps sod seed their current stands, but guiding them through that process in terms of how to do that and really look to select different forage varieties that work for their region. So we can look at what's suited to their field, and basically they select their province, they select their soil zone, and then they also answer 10 criteria. They can enter up to 10 criteria. And from there, what it identifies is the different species that may be appropriate for their area and allows them to engage in further research, conversations with forage seed, salespeople, those types of things. And I'm really excited to say actually that this tool was met with such positive reception that we're looking to potentially, there's an application in to launch a tool in Eastern Canada as well. So like I said, this is a very short snippet of who we are and what we do. I'd encourage you to take a look at the website. We're always looking for feedback as well. We're in the process of building our next 5-year plan. There'll be a producer survey going out in January to obtain feedback as to areas we should focus. And it's a privilege to work for producers. My family is from beef production, and I have to say it is truly a privilege to work for Alberta beef producers and Canadian beef producers.
Thanks, Andrea. That was great. It's definitely been a pretty exciting year, I would say, here in Alberta for agriculture research. That it's been, I don't think I've ever talked about research near as much in my life total until the last, say, 6-8 months. So we did have a question from Paul Hinnon, I think. And he just asked how do we fund research at consistent dollar amounts, or do those dollar amounts change from year to year? And how do we determine how much and what research projects are funded and prioritized? Karen Schmid, our research and extension specialist at ABP, was able to give an answer through the chat function for those of you that are following along. And maybe Andrea has a little something to add there as well.
Sure. So basically, we come forward with a 5-year national strategy that was presented to the provinces, and it was marketing, research, policy, and public trust working together. And from there, we provided a recommendation in terms of funding allocations for research, marketing, and public and stakeholder engagement. And what I'll say is the continuity of funding for all of those is really important through the national checkoff. Research is a long-term game. We have to set out fairly long-term commitments, and it's important to have that long-term stable funding. The other thing I'll say is when COVID occurred, as an example, industry had to move on some very quick projects around things like actually safety in processing plants, looking at price insurance opportunities, those types of things, and doing the economic analysis associated with that. And the one benefit of industry through checkoff being available is that we can mobilize fairly quickly when we needed to under COVID to do some pretty innovative work to make sure that we could continue operations at certain levels. And I think the interesting part about that is going through government processes isn't usually that quick for research funding, if anybody has any experience in that. So it is something that I think it should be, we typically try to leverage producer funding with government funding, but in certain cases, the industry having that ability to mobilize quickly, whether it's marketing or research or public and stakeholder engagement, I think is of extraordinary value.
We have another question in our Q&A, and I think it gives us a great segue into our fourth industry partner that we're going to be hearing from tonight, and that's Canada Beef. Michael Young is the president of Canada Beef, is joining us with an update on our domestic and international beef markets. So we do have a question from Craig Lair, and I'll ask Michael to maybe answer that within his presentation, that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the consumer has become more concerned with their food supply. What is being done to capitalize on what I would call an opportunity to showcase Alberta Canadian beef to the domestic market and educate the consumer on who may be listening with open ears? And as we referenced earlier at Alberta Beef Producers, we have been utilizing some social media influencers to really promote eating beef here in Alberta. We also have amped up our education resources, as well as reaching out through mainstream media as well. So maybe, and at the end of Michael's presentation, I'll let Brad cover off what I missed there to Craig, and I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight at your meeting. And, you know, I also want to congratulate Brad. I'm looking forward to working with him on both domestic and international programs as we move forward. So I've got a short amount of time and I want to cover a lot of space. So I just want to, first of all, just cover, actually, I'm going to get rid of this thing here. Hold on. All right. Sorry about that. So some of our strategic priorities when COVID hit, and it really came down to kind of the 3 R's, where we were going to, you know, respond immediately to immediate issues and then work on recovery to adapt as quick as possible. And then probably one of the most important things was to rebound as quick as possible. For us, that broke down to 5 stages, which was gather and interpret data, pivot our programs and services, keep our stakeholders informed, create the solutions to mitigate the impact, and then anticipate and plan for the post-COVID world, whatever that looks like. Oops. So, and why aren't we going to the next one here? Sorry about that. Okay. So the next normal, obviously, and this is part of what we're seeing now, it is really disrupted business as usual, and it just continues to get complicated out there. Retail and food service operators, they are all responding by experimenting and innovating, and that is competition. As the person with the question pointed out, there are a lot of opportunities being offered to us through this pandemic, and my father once told me, never waste a good catastrophe if you can. Everyone is sort of reimagining their sales strategies, their positioning, and their communications with their customers. But what is holding strong is what we call the perishable perimeter, and that's kind of the last bastion of consumer appeal in a bricks and mortar retail space. That's the outer ring in the store where consumers select perishable foods. So that's really the big attention. That's where everyone is focusing now. Quick retail channel update. You might have already heard that demand for all proteins is holding extremely strong, but the distribution channels are changing, and with that comes opportunity. Many retail operations are still reporting 15 to 25% increases in beef sales year over year. That's just the beef sales. So they're having a good year, and they're definitely, I'm told, making up more than the losses that we're seeing on the food service side, which hasn't fared very well. We know that Canadians are eating more meals at home, and they're reaching out for recipe ideas and ways of feeding their families, and they've got tight budgets. That means for us, we need to make solutions available that are suited for budgets, suited for economy-minded consumers who are looking at that retail meat case, and they're seeing, in some cases, especially when this pandemic started, poultry went down and pork went down, beef went up. So we really did have to come forward with a lot of solutions quickly. The biggest opportunity though is delivery, takeout, meal kit, and whole meal replacement. These categories are absolutely booming, and this is an area we have to get in as quick as possible. Our product does not fit as easily as our competitors, so we need to do some work on getting those beef portions down to the size needed, especially on record high carcass sizes. But we are building a strategy for this category, and many experts are saying that this is going to stay. This is not going to go away when COVID finishes. We're seeing the second wave lockdowns now, and it's starting to signal some hoarding. We're starting to see this again. Now, the food service channel, unfortunately, has not fared well. The second wave lockdowns are bringing increased restrictions on any kind of recovery in the sector. The colder temperatures across the country are closing the patio trade, which is reducing the available space to serve guests safely. We just were updated last week that at the moment, 7,500 restaurants have permanently closed in Canada since March. That's an awfully large number and a sad outcome to this catastrophe. The top 5 cities that were hit just last month were Toronto, Vancouver, Waterloo, and Montreal. Traditional restaurants and casual dining seem to be the hardest hit. And they say this is only the beginning of permanent closures as loans and rent payments continue to mount and the second or third waves are looming. We know that 180,000 jobs have been lost in the sector, and Restaurants Canada expects to see 100,000 more jobs lost in the coming months. So fortunately, food service is really in a bad space right now. They're suffering badly. From a global point of view, you may be paying attention to what's going on in China. It's really bizarre what's happening. They're not functioning as a market-driven economy. They're judging who they're going to buy their protein from, basically based on their infection rate in plants, and it's trial by media, really. So far, they've delisted either voluntarily or permanently 63 protein supplying plants around the world. Only a few in Canada so far, but some of the countries have been hit with 7 or 8 or 9 plants. The breakdown is there's 34 pork, 13 beef, 14 poultry, 1 lamb, and a cold storage. China claims that they found the virus on packaging materials from more than 20 countries, and this is the messaging they're actually putting out within their country, and this is one of the reasons why we need to step up our efforts to communicate what Canada does well. last Monday, and the city of Jinan, they claim they detected SARS and COVID particles on frozen beef from New Zealand, and this is a first. So that one really kind of made us perk up a little bit. But fortunately, China is still like the Lone Ranger on this science. Nobody else is buying it. Japan is not listening to it. South Korea. None of our export partners outside of China are considering this. The other thing to watch is avian flu. The outbreaks now are surging through the Eastern Hemisphere. Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Netherlands, Sweden, and the UK now have affected poultry plants, which is causing a huge shortage. The bans on the poultry products from affected countries, they're really piling up weekly. It's even hard to keep track of what's going on there. Now, this is on top of the ban because of African swine fever on German pork, which is also putting a big hole in protein supply globally. Once you get this African swine fever, you're generally out of the market for at least a year, maybe more, depending on how you handle it and your re-eradication. So there's lots of pork in the EU. The slaughter and the freezer spaces are at capacity now, and the prices are dropping. So, in a world that is, especially Asia, where they're looking for protein, this is bad news. I'll touch on some of the things we did in terms of keeping stakeholders informed. Canada Beef has created 3 market intelligence reports that are sent out at various intervals. One is a Canadian Beef Trade Report. Second one is our Global Market Intelligence Report, and we've added a COVID dashboard to it, which is, and this one goes out monthly. And then we've added a Domestic Market Intelligence Report that's really getting rave reviews from our partners in the domestic marketplace. We've also launched a new website, CanadianBeefPerforms.ca, and within that, we hold all of our sort of business-to-business stuff and technical materials that aren't really suitable for the consumer site. So the site is growing. If you haven't seen it and you're looking for some interesting, there's a lot of videos that we're producing now are there if you want to check it out. Another thing we're doing is we partnered with the pork industry and and local embassies around the world, well, in markets that are important to us, to put on a series of webinars. And these are safeguarding the Canadian meat supply. We've completed 5 of these now, one in China, one in Japan, South Korea, and then Taiwan and Philippines we just did this week. We're going to do Mexico, Vietnam, Europe, and the UK in February. And these seminars basically open up with a senior official, and literally we are getting cooperation from the Canadian government. We've got ambassadors, senior trade commissioners opening up these webinars, giving a great overview of Canada and the country we're speaking in. We then each present our own story. So we, of course, deliver the Canadian Beef Advantage, the programs and services that our organization brings to the table, and we introduce the local team. And then there's a section that is hosted by Dr. Yang, and she gives a really good food industry overview of COVID-19. And then we finish up with an animated version of the safeguards and the investments that the Canadian industry has done to protect our people, to protect our workers, and to protect the food supply of anything coming out of Canada. And continuing on in education and prevention, we've created COVID-19 essential training tools, which can be applied in the plants, but they're also being utilized in retail operations, and they're just simple, basic information for them to build their own plan. Securing Canadian beef supply videos that dial in on both what's happening on farm and also what's happening at the plant level, and then safeguarding the Canadian meat supply fact sheet, which you can see on the right there. That's the basis for the webinars that I talked about in the last slide. Switching now over to marketing, we have basically 2 focuses here. We have what we call a CRAVE campaign. This is generic marketing. It's a little more edgy. You can tell by the graphic below where you have a nice consumer with a tattooed sleeve there, but it does focus in on a demographic we do need to connect with. Focus there is beef the one and only. It's a year-long media mix where we're delivering these messages through Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Conto Box. The focus is on value cuts, ground beef, and family favorites. The other one is what we call our trust campaign, and this is a branded marketing campaign, and it focuses in on inspiring families to share their stories with Canadian beef through their social networks. We also utilize social influencers to talk about it. We use farmers and ranchers and dietitians and chefs. We've gotten really good feedback, and this is something we're definitely going to carry over to the next year. Now let's get a little closer to the point of purchase. What's going on there? I told you that a lot of Canadians now are back in the kitchen. They're looking to buy products, and beef demand is huge, but now they're realizing they don't have the recipes that they need. So our website was being flooded with information on how to cook beef, which is great. We immediately dusted off some of our old tools from days gone by. So the basic preparation information that we developed 20 years ago, we updated that and relaunched it in what we call a clear view label. There's an example there of what that looks like. Retailers like this because it floats on top of the package and it doesn't take away from the presentation of the meat. So we've had huge uptake from retailers looking for these labels. They're free of charge. We're supporting anybody who wants this. So we're just flooding the market with these recipes. We've also dusted off our Slice and Save Canadian Beef Value Strategy program. And what that is, it's providing information on subprimal sales, you know, the kind of things you would see at Costco where you buy the larger pieces and then cut it at home. We've approached this in two ways. The Slice and Save labels that go right on the packaging, and also a set of videos that are available. The first set are going to be launched through Costco, and I'll talk about a little bit about that later. But we're getting big uptake on that. 15 national and regional independent operators have joined the program just in the last 2 months. So that's going along excellent. Value cut, again, dialing in on value cut, underutilized cuts that, you know, that offer a good value to the consumer. We partnered with a company called Magic Creations. They produce a small sachet that will tenderize less tender cuts in about 20 minutes. So we partnered with them and then focused in on the different cuts that can be used, and then worked with them to get these programs, these co-branded programs, into the marketplace. We've got 40 plus national, regional, independent banners that are on this program to date. And we believe this particular program has some legs for the future. So we're looking at other sachets that we can add to this mix as we go down the road. Demand building is always important to us. We saw a huge rush in ground meat products out of the retail case. We also saw a lot of the plant-based stuff getting into that category. So we relaunched a merchandising guide just for ground beef and ground veal and blended products, which really presents a whole new set of products for retailers to consider in this category to get some excitement back into the single source protein category, as opposed to what else they may be looking at. So this style of merchandising will be building on this as we go down the road. The other thing I want to talk about is what we call the digital real estate, and that's really what COVID has brought forward to us all. I think we can appreciate that. It's opened the door for opportunity. It's providing increased reliance on the internet and business and personal communication. Shopping at home and e-commerce is here to stay. All the experts are saying it's not going to go away. That means we need to get into this real estate, and we need to get in there as quick as possible. So it's a significant portion of this new virtual space is here to stay, but we're not the only ones that want to move in, and we need to get in there as quick as possible. And that's something we're doing at Canada Beef. The other thing I want to lead you to is the evolution of QR codes. You know, they kind of went away for a while, or nobody was using them, but when COVID came back, now everyone in restaurants are using QR codes to see menus. Well, the opportunity is huge for us. Now we have a scannable solution on each package. It could be recipes or nutritional information, could be merchandise or branding attributes, merchandising ideas. It could be home butcher or chef education. Really, the sky's the limit in terms of how you can direct an end user to these things. We'll be incorporating these in many of our projects moving forward. In all countries, actually. It's huge in Asia. Now, the biggest success story probably out of this whole COVID thing is the repurposing of the Canadian Beef Center of Excellence. You can imagine, here we have this beautiful facility set up to to educate, connect, and innovate and inspire. However, we can't bring a single person to it. So literally, we had to come up with a new plan. We were planning on moving into video production anyway. We just accelerated it. And I got to say that the team over there has done an amazing job converting that facility from an open area into a video studio. They've actually produced over 100 videos since March, and they've got quite an aggressive plan on the table for next year. Literally, we're breaking it into three strategic areas, which is going to be studio and video webinar production, both in-house that will serve our needs, but then partner production. So we can do stuff for Alberta Beef. We can do stuff for Alberta Beef customers. We can do stuff for Alberta Beef customers halfway around the world. And we're doing that now. Learning solutions is why the center was created. And we are going to not forget why we're there. We're going to create sort of 3 levels of that, what we call foundational courses. And then we're going to look at specialized courses, which will cover consumer wants and needs, plus professional applications. And then, very important, partner courses, things that other people want to produce to help them sell more Canadian beef. And then finally, the industry engagement. And this is virtual and in person. 2 parts of it. One is going to be a generic and a partnered virtual mission hosting. We simply can't bring everybody on the planet to Alberta. We will still bring people here. Of course we will. That's what the center was set up for. However, we're going to create virtual tours, virtual mission tours, so that we can extend our reach, extend our investment, and get in front of a lot more people. So that was a quick flyby. I touched on a lot of areas. I want to thank you all very much. And I think I'll take questions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. That was a great presentation. That you guys have been busy. It's been phenomenal to watch how Canada Beef has adapted to the crisis and getting that information out into the consumers' hands. That it's been awesome to watch how quickly everything has been able to adapt. I think it looks like we have our last but not least presenter lined up and ready to go. We have Amy Peck, our manager with public and stakeholder engagement. Good evening, Amy, and I'm going to turn it over to you real quick.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelly. I will try to make my presentation very swift, but still full of information. And thanks so much for having me here tonight. So as Kelly mentioned, my name is Amy Peck, and I manage the Public and Stakeholder Engagement Program. I'm going to touch quickly on issue management throughout the last year. We started off with healthy living issues coming out in Chatelaine and Canadian Living, really trying to tie reducing meat consumption to a diet resolution. So we wrote responses to those. As well, with COVID-19 being declared a pandemic, there were narratives online attempting to link zoonotic virus transfer with feedlot production. And so we secured statements from various veterinarians indicating that there is no zoonotic virus threat that exists in Canada. And then when we did see that carried by a mainstream newsletter, we were able to submit that response. You might recall Burger King in July released their Cows Menu campaign, which was heavily concentrated on flatulence of cows. And so we worked with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef with their parent company, Restaurants Brands International, and we were able to get an edit to the video as well. They pulled the focus from the campaign, so it didn't go on as many broadcast TV stations as they had initially planned. And they did actually put out an apology letter to all the members of the Global Roundtable. And they're looking to work a little closer with some of our industry experts like Dr. Frank Mitloner going forward. I'm just going to quickly touch on blended products. We've had meetings with Canadian companies that are positioning blended products. So those that contain either beans or lentils or pea protein. as being superior products, mostly for their environmental footprint. And so we're meeting with these companies and really, talking about an advertising strategy that positions it as being the best of both and not superior to 100% meat product. On the substitute product side, we have seen some real changes in that simulated marketplace. Right at the start of COVID-19, when we saw panic buying, people were voting with their wallets and they were overwhelmingly choosing beef and leaving the simulated products behind. We've also seen with some changes in demand in food service, as Michael was talking about, we've seen the McDonald's PLT come off the menu. We've also seen Beyond Meat get pulled at Tim Hortons, and the Beyond Meat meatballs are no longer at Subway. So although these are products that are going to stay and they are going to continue to gain market share, the pandemic has given us an interesting look at the challenges that they will also face. And then we worked with the Global Roundtable on the UN Act Now campaign, which was advising to reduce your meat consumption, and we were able to get a tweet pulled from them, and we have some meetings booked with UN going forward. Public and stakeholder engagement at our first annual consumer research this year, really looking to do a deep dive on consumer perceptions about the way cattle are raised in Canada. Here are some great highlights for you. I'll just go through it quickly. So most Canadians have a positive impression of the industry. You can see here, positive towards both beef farmers and beef production. And it's also well regarded as one that produces a high quality product and has positive economic contributions for our country. So while impressions are still largely positive, Canadians are less certain about industry efforts to limit our environmental impacts. So you can see here, still 2/3 of respondents think that, we're good stewards of the land, and 66% think we're making an effort. But those are numbers that we definitely want to see higher, and that's the opportunity for public and stakeholder engagement. Diving into a must-win target here, we see that millennials have less positive views of the industry. And so their perceptions of the industry and their concerns are not unique. They're shared across all demographics. They're just felt much more strongly in millennials, particularly females. And so we had already identified this as a must-win target for us. And that's really where you see, Guardians of the Grasslands being positioned, much more of an emotional tone. It's to hit that target demographic. What we came out of the research with, though, is that there's a lot of opportunity to improve impressions of the industry, and in particular, dispelling perceptions of environmental impacts. So we put our key messages into this consumer research, and we saw a huge jump in sentiment, when they're reading about our commitment to the environmental footprint or in preserving native grasslands, among others. We see this huge jump in people feeling better about the industry. And so we know we need to continue to put that information out there. We had a question from Craig in the Q&A, really talking about, how are we capitalizing on the interest of consumers, in the food supply due to COVID-19. And so, Dennis had talked about, we were doing these virtual media scrums. Well, once we had this built up audience of both ag and mainstream media that were really interested in what CCA and industry partners had to say, we said, let's capitalize on this and start to position stories that we want to be carried in the media and not so much of a strict industry update. So the first one we did was called Feeding the Future. This was really focused on the impacts of COVID-19 to young producers that don't have a lot of equity built up, and really need the assistance of various programs. We also did one with various NGOs. And so this was really looking at the risks to native grasslands because of COVID-19. If these ranchers are not able to stay economically viable, we could see situations similar to BSE when 5 million acres of grasslands were converted for other purposes. And so really proud that, Ducks and Nature Conservancy and Birds Canada participated, as well as Dalhousie University. And this was co-hosted by the Canadian Roundtable. And then We also held a special nominee showcase event for the TESA regional recipients. And so, taking these great initiatives that the industry is already doing and then trying to position them, in a way that will resonate with consumers. And so really, instead of focusing on really watering systems, let's talk about the wildlife capacity that have been built in to these operations. And so, we're just trying to keep putting that positive information out there and keep capitalizing on the audience that is interested in what the beef industry is doing. As part of those presentations, we created this To Leave Something Behind campaign. It focused on 3 young producers, all from Alberta, both in the cow-calf and feedlot sectors. And they were talking about how they want to leave something behind for the next generation. They want to stay financially viable. Again, these were emotionally toned interviews, and heavily concentrating on a mother's perspective to try and hit that millennial female demographic. And this campaign won a Best of CAMA award just last week. In terms of public outreach and partnerships, Earth Day, we had a great webinar with our same NGO partners doing a screening of Guardians of the Grasslands. Guardians was also shown at Ag in Motion and Farm Forum as part of building public trust in agriculture with the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity. Just 2 weeks ago at the Royal Winter Fair, we did a really great presentation. Jill Harvey hosted, and Steve Lee, our friend from the 3% Project, was interviewed. And she really talked through his experiences from going from, thinking that the beef industry is detrimental to the environment to now advocating for ecological goods and services payments with the government. And so it's such a unique and interesting story that, Steve, he's a first generation Canadian, lives in the, GTA area, and now he's working as a UN policy advisor. So it's so great to have him out and advocating for the industry. And, we recognize that he's not supportive on all sectors of the beef industry, but very supportive, in the grass-based cow-calf system. And we're going to keep exposing him to the good stories that the other sectors have to tell. The Narwhal is a environmentally based publication on the West Coast. They did 2 pretty extensive stories that featured the beef industry. The first was Meet the People Saving Canada's Grasslands. You can see the caption here. It says, grazing is actually necessary for healthy grasslands. To have a strictly climate change environmental organization carrying a story about cattle, being vital is such a win for the industry. And we're so proud to have that story out there. The last one I'll touch on, this is Stu McNish. He's got a platform called Conversations That Matter. And it's also carried in the Vancouver Sun. So a pretty target demographic for us, one that we're really excited to tap into. He did an interview with Sherry Copperthorne Barnes talking about, is beef sustainable? And then his latest here with Bob Lowe, who I think we can all agree maybe needs a GoFundMe account for a new interview hat, was talking about, what's the beef with beef? And these are extensive interviews going into, the benefits of beef production for the environment, and great pieces for us all to share. Touch on Guardians of the Grasslands. It's had great success, although it had to go to virtual screenings rather than in person. It's been picked for 18 film festivals since we started submitting. And we're excited to see that keep going. The most exciting part for us, I guess, is that a lot of these film festivals are climate change or environment based in Vancouver, in Ottawa, other cities in Ontario. And so we're hitting that demographic, that urban market that wouldn't be exposed to the benefits of beef production. And so really hitting our goal of external audiences. So Guardians will go public in March 2021. So look forward to kind of an extensive launch plan from that. And I'll leave it there. I know we're short on time. That's my email address. Happy to take questions and available by email at any time to kind of continue on these conversations.
Wow, Amy, that was a ton of information packed into a very short time. Thank you so much. And And I don't actually think we need a GoFundMe for Bob's hat. I think he just went to one of the secondhand stores or antique stores in Nanton to pick that one up. So I don't think it costs that much.
Right off the road, it looks like. Yeah.
I think so, but honestly, in my own personal opinion, you know, I've spent a lot of time talking about public trust here lately, and I'm proud of how I feel that the beef industry, we have actually started moving that bar. I know it sometimes doesn't feel like it, but I think it's been through great work that all of our industry organizations, including public and stakeholder engagement, have done. But I personally feel as though that bar is just moving inch by inch, and hopefully we can someday say we won the battle. Thank you so much. I'll kind of keep an eye out here for any further questions. You know, I would like to remind everyone on here tonight that all of these full reports are available in the Alberta Beef Producers Annual Report on our website at www.albertabeef.org, and print copies are available by request. So we're kind of already at our time limit, and I know we've had some great information tonight, and you know, we can always contact, you know, please feel free to contact us through Alberta Beef, and we can get you in touch with all of the presenters. We really appreciate everybody joining us tonight, and I'm not seeing any further questions popping up here in the chat. We may have had some questions received into the office. We'll try and answer those questions if you're online. If we didn't hit those points for you, we will get answers back to you. So I hope you've all heard tonight that we have been working very hard at ABP to update our organization for our fellow producers. This is a very exciting time to be involved in ABP and to be a part of those changes. This is an ever-changing time that COVID-19 has brought to our communities, to our country, to our world. Our industry organizations have, as you've heard tonight, they've been able to adapt and continue their work. And this is something I think we as beef producers should be incredibly proud of. So for your information, we at ABP have been looking into new restrictions coming into place for Alberta tomorrow. Just to help advise our fellow producers, I was hoping that we would have the clear answer for you of hosting or attending female bull sales during the next 3 weeks. You know, we have all the new regulations, restrictions coming in tomorrow. We recommend that you do reach out to the government of Alberta just to make sure that you are aware of any of the new requirements, and please take all necessary precautions. If you haven't done so already, please register to attend one of the 2 resolution meetings taking place next week. We are offering 2 meetings to accommodate schedules, but the purpose of the meetings will be the same both nights. So you don't have to attend both meetings. The voting deadline for our delegate elections is December 11th, and the election results will be available in January. At this time, we are planning to hold an in-person AGM in March, along with other cattle organizations who typically would have held their AGMs at the Alberta Beef Industry Conference. The general session will also be available to be streamed online, and a recording of tonight's Producer Town Hall will be available on the ABP website. So if we have no further questions, I would like to thank you all for attending tonight. If you have more comments or if we didn't get to you, please reach out to either the office or any of our presenters. We are more than willing to have a conversation. We at ABP would like to wish you all a happy, healthy Christmas season. And during these unprecedented times, please do your best to stay healthy, check on your friends and family, and reach out to those in need. Once again, thank you all from all of us at ABP for taking your time to join us, and from all of our industry partners. I hope you all a great night.